this story of these infants bring there you are, you're back. Bring you on to sort of, I think, another really key thesis statement that you mentioned there, that it's 97 different stories, and we cannot stereotype or sort of caricature people in the past, and that they are diverse. The thing is, you also say humans are creatures of imagination and we love stories. And stories, like nuanced stories, are the hardest to tell, right? We like 3-act structures. We like simple characters with simple motivations. And so you've got these two balances of humans love imagination, but we should also appreciate nuance and complexity. Do you ever feel like you're fighting against a sort of an uphill battle for nuance, especially when you work in TV? 3-act structure is all there, and you must have had producers say, could you just make this simple? Could you just like have a baddie or a goodie? Could you know, do you feel like you're fighting against a basic human instinct to make things a simple story?
Do you know, with the television, I don't feel as I'm fighting anything, and I feel as though I've learned so much by working in television. And I certainly feel, I was talking about public engagement at the university. I work at the University of Birmingham last week, and I was talking to people in music and arts about it, and the need for the story. And I think that as a scientist working, starting to work in public engagement, it took me a while actually to really engage with that, and to be open to learning from, I suppose, people who had more of a kind of arts and humanities background. And I really think that it's important for scientists to engage with people from other disciplines, because we can learn so much in that way. I think I've become a better teacher by thinking about narrative in my lectures, for instance. A lecture isn't simply a bunch of facts that you're throwing at your students. You've got your students, they're a captive audience, poor things. Unless you're doing a remote lecture on Zoom and they can go off and do something else. But if they're in a lecture theatre, they're generally speaking a captive audience. And I think that the onus is then on me to tell them an entertaining story. I mean that, it must be entertaining. I have to keep their interest for an hour. I shouldn't expect them to just sit there and listen to me just kind of giving them a bunch of facts. So I do think I've become a better teacher because of thinking about that through writing, but also particularly through working with some fantastic television producers. There is, if I think back to when I first started doing it, and particularly, not just doing more kind of directly observational stuff like Time Team or Digging for Britain, but working on some of the big series that I've worked on, where there does have to be a really solid story. So things like Incredible Human Journey, Origins of Us, Ice Age Giants, where you have to keep people engaged for the hour that each program is. And I think in those cases there's certainly a compromise between how much nuance and how much I suppose uncertainty you allow in, and how much you're going to be railroaded along one particular narrative. And I think it is a compromise, but I think when you know when it works, I mean, you can get lost. Oh, my camera's switched off again. I will switch it. I'll try and do my on and off thing again, and we'll see if that brings me back.
Thank you.
Keep talking anyway. I'm still here.
Yeah, please do, like a podcast.
You can easily get lost in all the details if you just if you go off down all those rabbit holes, and if you go into all of that nuance, you can easily get lost in all of that. Mm-hmm. So I think that I'm switching to a different camera because my lovely camera has just given up on me completely.
Battery is exhausted.
So yes, it is a balance. You can end up just losing track of the story completely and rambling, as I probably am doing in this answer. Or you can try to have some kind of structure there and allow yourself to go off and explore alternatives, allow yourself to go off and explore a different hypothesis, for instance. And I think also you can be quite honest with people when you're presenting science, and be honest about when you don't know what the answer is, or be honest about levels of certainty. And perhaps we don't do that enough. I think that there's a tendency to report on science as though it's very cut and dried, and that, you know, once you've got some kind of answer, that's it, and it's not going to change. And I think that's been interesting over the course of the pandemic, because obviously the story has changed as we've got more information. And it's very uncomfortable if that is then covered in the media in such a way that, you know, suggests that all scientists are changing their minds. And it's like, yes, they're changing their minds because more evidence is coming in, and that's how science works. It's always a process. We're constantly changing our minds, and that's a good thing. We don't very often find that we do complete U-turns, because it's normally that the evidence is slightly kind of shifting rather than making us go, oh, hang on a minute, we seem to have been going in completely the wrong direction. Let's head off in this direction instead. But I think a better understanding, you know, if we can present science in that way, then hopefully people will understand better that science is a process, and also that they can be engaged in it, and that they can think, oh, hang on a minute, there's several hypotheses here. Which one do I think is the most likely?
So last question from me before we move on to the brilliant questions that are already coming in from the audience. There's a moment where you describe Mark Redknapp, who's another colleague, and there's this wistful moment where you say he has a note of longing in his voice. He'd still like to go back and find out more. And it doesn't not sound like a drug. It sort of sounds like an addictive, you know, you go back to the bones. You talking about the Crick project, you know, this idea of like, I want to know the answers, I need to. Do you think that you could ever go cold turkey, or do you think you'll be, you know, with a trowel or digging through bones until you're 90?
I think there's definitely an addictive element to it. I mean, I think that archaeology itself is just exciting. It doesn't matter what you're finding something that's been buried in the ground for a long time, hundreds, thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of years. And even if that object, that thing, whatever it is you're finding, is not going to completely rewrite the history books or be completely groundbreaking, it's the first time anyone's seen it. And there's something utterly alluring about that. And that's why I think, you know, Digging for Britain I love making Digging for Britain. We're heading off next week to start filming, and I'm so looking forward to it, because it must be the only series that the BBC commissions on the basis of knowing nothing about what's going to be in it. You know, it's kind of like we've got vague ideas about where we're going and which sites we're going to be going to, but we don't actually know what we're going to see. And that is just so exciting. Yeah. And I feel so privileged to, you know, to present that and to travel around and visit all these archaeological sites and see that evidence emerging out of the ground. And actually doing it as well. So if people are interested in doing it, get in touch with, you know, look at the CBA, the Council for British Archaeology web pages are great, and they will flag up lots of community digs that you can get involved in and that kind of thing, because there's something really lovely about just getting your hands dirty.
Because I was about to say, so that links to Lucy's question, which is how do I get into all of this? That's an answer. Go on to the CBA website. Actually, just on that, in the acknowledgements, you mentioned Trailblazers, which is a brilliant project that aims to sort of lift up women in archaeology. Could you speak about that a little bit? I think that deserves a little bit more attention.
Yes, well, at the weekend, I was on Saturday, I was at Lyme Regis helping to unveil the new statue of Mary Anning. He's a magnificent trailblazer. What a fantastic pun. So that campaign is all about, as you say, making those women of the digging sciences, paleontology, archaeology, other areas of earth sciences visible. And I think that there's been a double whammy. One thing is that as you go back further into the past, yes, there were fewer women than men working in these areas, but we've also selectively forgotten them. And so it's really wonderful to be able to make them visible again. And that fantastic statue by the sculptor Denise Dustin is just wonderful now, striding out on the seafront at Lyme Regis. And one of the modern female paleontologists who was there talking about that at the unveiling was Tori Herridge, who's one of the people behind Trailblazers. If you've not heard of it before, I am saying trowel, as in an archaeological trowel. It's not just my strange Bristol accent. Trailblazers, go and have a look at the website, and there's lots and lots of information there, and lots of lovely biographies of amazing women in archaeology, earth sciences, paleontology.
I completely agree. Go do that after this talk. Watch the rest of the talk. Another question from the audience. Martin says, burial and especially cremation was really difficult until recently. Rain could defeat it. Do you think we lose something in forgetting that? You speak about that briefly in the book. The idea that there had to be experts in charge of burial and cremation.
Yes, especially the Roman period. It was very bad luck to be semi-ustum, to be left half burned. That was not a good funeral. So you would have a good ustor who would basically choose a good day in terms of the weather, build a fantastic pyre, and you need a serious amount of kindling to burn a body. And they would be responsible for making sure that the body is properly burned. So yes, and of course, I don't know how much longer we'll be doing cremation in Britain, actually, because we have switched obviously from burial to cremation over a century. I mean, that's an extraordinary change, and that's entirely economic, I think, even though there has been increasing secularization in Britain over the 20th century. That change really has been driven by just a need to dispose of bodies. And so there was a switch from, more than 99% burial to more than 90% cremation now in Britain. But of course, it's all done in gas-fired crematoria. So it is deeply unsustainable. It is not the kind of thing that we can carry on doing when we're trying to tackle climate change. So there are lots of other potential solutions, which I do discuss at the end, the last chapter of Ancestors, actually, including new facilities which are popping up for being dissolved and used as fertilizer, which I think is probably the most sustainable, if not the most romantic way of leaving.
I don't know. I think human mulch, and then you get turned into a tree. That's quite nice. Yeah. Okay, so very different question from Frank. What is the thing that we were all taught at schools about the Anglo Saxons that you wish we hadn't been? That's probably a long list.
Oh, that they're a group of people.
Go on, speak about that a little bit more.
Who are the Anglo Saxons? So I do go off a bit on one in the book about this, because I think that it's very easy to parcel up the past into these easily digestible lumps. And we go, the Romans, and then they went, and then the Anglo-Saxons arrive. And it's like, hang on, who arrives? What? Most of the people in Britain in the 5th and 6th centuries would have been the descendants of people who'd been there in the 3rd and 4th at the end of the Roman period. The Roman army leaves, certainly, but who else leaves? Most people just stay here. And then if we've got some incomers, some new people coming over from, I don't know, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, how many? And really, how much of an influence is that having? And is it just a few elite people coming over, or is it more broad than that? The Venerable Bede would have us believe that there's great hordes of people coming over. Ancient DNA is starting to look at this, and we're not seeing evidence of a massive population replacement in those centuries. We're seeing something much more subtle. And we'll get a better handle on that when the 1,000 Ancient Genomes project has yielded some more of its results. But yes, I think somehow we've got to be able to teach it in such a way that it's simple at primary school, certainly, but that it hints that there is complexity there later on. I suppose it's a little bit like the way we get taught about atoms, and that you go from learning that electrons are sort of circling in orbits to by the time you get to A levels, you're talking about probability clouds of electrons. And it's probably a similar thing in history, that we can start off with those simple ideas, but we've got to realize that that's just a way of describing the past, which doesn't actually reflect the real complexity.
You're not a fan of the Venerable Bede, are you? There's a point at which you say he suddenly gets very specific about dates.
Yes, a lot of stuff. Very specific about dates, which he doesn't seem to have any sources for. So yeah, I mean, I am a fan of his. He writes brilliantly. He's given us a lot of history. It's just that there's a lot of myth in there as well, all woven in, and we have to try to disentangle it in the same way that I'm not a fan of Gildas, because that is just the Ruin of Britain is just a polemical sermon. So I'm not a fan of it if you're taking it as a historical document and very objective, because it's not objective at all. As a polemic sermon, it's wonderful.
I mean, so going back to the limited sources that are focusing on usually elites or ideologies that are sort of quite high up in the class echelon. There's this quite romantic notion that you mentioned a couple of times, that there's this farmer standing in a field and the Romans pass through and he's like, okay, and then the Romans go again. He's just doing his own thing. There is a class element here inherently, right? That we do leave out certain people because they don't have fancy burials, and if they are buried at all, and it's just, I don't know, something we have to grapple with and remember all the time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially during that Roman period, because what you've got, and no, probably all the way through, I think you're right, you know, that where we've got the stuff, that's people who are materially wealthy. And so, you know, when people are buried with an awful lot of stuff, well, I tell you, now I'm going to argue with myself, because sometimes it isn't. And I'm very interested in Hugh Wilmot's idea about why people are buried with lots of brooches, and it's about the seasons. So it's basically, you're just burying, in the Anglo Saxon period, you're burying somebody in all their clothes. And if it's summertime, they'll only have 1 or 2 brooches because they're just holding their dress up. If it's wintertime, they might have 5 because they're wearing several layers of cloaks and things, which are all pinned on with brooches. And therefore, it's not representing how wealthy somebody is at all. It's just representing if they were buried in summer or winter. That's something fascinating that I'd not thought of before I spoke to Hugh. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the Roman period, our eye is drawn by the big villas with their beautiful mosaics, like that amazing Rutland mosaic that we had on Digging for Britain last year. And, you know, wonderful bathhouses and fortresses and all of that kind of thing. And then you go, hang on a minute, let's go out into rural Britain, and how much of an impact is it making there? Yes, we're getting little bits and pieces of Roman culture, but there's that fantastic book by Stuart Laycock and Miles Russell, Un-Roman Britain. There's, you know, there really is, if we're being objective about it, there's this kind of veneer of Romanitas which descends over Britain. And I think a lot of what we're seeing in the 5th century is that Britain has left that kind of economic union of the Roman Empire and political union of the Roman Empire, and that we're just starting to get regional differences emerging again. We're starting to kind of see what was there before, but what was kind of overlain by this kind of rather crude overlay. Hugh talks about it so beautifully. He basically says in the Roman period, it's like Amazon Prime. You could get anything from anywhere. You know, and those so regional kind of local differences are obscured by the fact that you've got these amphorae of wine that have come from the Mediterranean, and you can order in building materials from all over the place.
I mean, it's just a final point. You know, you say that it's just the seasons, and that's how they're buried. I think that there is a sense in which, and going back to at the beginning of our conversation, where the person who's buried is looking down, going, why are they doing that? Why are they singing that song? There is a potential that we are obsessing over things that they really did not care about, you know, or it was just accidental that it fell in there, or even, you know, maybe they didn't even care about how they were buried, and it was just a way that was done. And I suppose that's sort of the humility that's baked into this whole journey, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's always important to think about that, because when you see something and you know it's a ritual, I think we do tend to think that it's being done in a very thoughtful way. And again, that some people would have been doing those things in a very thoughtful way. Other people would have been doing them simply, as you say, because it's what you do. It's what my parents did. It's what the rest of my family do. And I think particularly with funerary rituals, that is what we do. Although I think we're starting, and again, coming back to humanism, I think that we're seeing a diversity of approaches to how you do a funeral now, because people are breaking away from that and saying, hang on a minute, I'm not just going to fit into that kind of formulaic idea of this is what a funeral is, and we'll just drop somebody's name in at a particular point. Let's do something which is a bit more meaningful and comes from, you know, a celebration of that person's life. So it's all about that person, rather than being a kind of formula where you can drop a name in. It's tricky, isn't it? Because I mean, sometimes it's very useful to have a formula that, you know, maybe that if you're doing that, if you're faced with putting together a funeral, that it's actually a very useful thing to have a template that's there ready to use. But yeah, again, that kind of thoughtfulness. Not every ritual is done with a great deal of thought.
Well, I mean, your book has been done with a great deal of thought, and I'm very sorry to say that we are over time. Thank you so much, Alice. Please, everyone, go and pre-order Buried. It comes out very soon. There is so much more in there. Audience, thank you for tuning in and for your questions. Head over to our website, How To Academy, for more brilliant speakers. Alice, thank you so much for your time for this chat. I'll give the final word to you.
Thank you very much for having me at the How To Academy. It's been fantastic. What a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much. And I will be officially launching the book at the Hay Festival on the 4th of June. And I'm also delighted to be at Glastonbury this year as well. So if any of you are headed there and you fancy something a bit different around Sunday lunchtime, head up to the Crow's Nest at the park. And I will be talking in between Lucy Cook, who's talking about her new book, Bitch, and Janina Ramirez, who's talking about her new book, Femina. So you can catch the three of us on Sunday lunchtime at Glastonbury.
What a roster. And check out Trailblazers, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye-bye, everybody.